Good afternoon, dear friends. You are on the Military Reporter channel. We are still with you continuing to study the situation at the front. So, let's open up the map. Yesterday, the Defense Ministry reported that there was no border crossing in the Belgorod region. But in fact, we can say here that they were lying, and we can say that they were not. There really was no border crossing yesterday. It was simply not allowed. There were breaches across the border, but they were pushed back. However, the situation changed yesterday, and now, as you can see from the maps, the border crossing did take place. Let me remind you that the Ukrainian armed forces launched an attack to enter the Belgorod region 2 days ago. At that time, 5 waves of attacks were recorded, all of them were repulsed, including an attack by an entire tank column. At the end of the first day of the offensive, the Ukrainian armed forces lost 6 tanks and dozens of armored vehicles. The main goal of the first day was an approach to Demidovka, but it failed. Yesterday the attacks continued. In the morning there were 2 waves in the same direction, to Demidovka, a border village about 200 meters from the border. The result for the AFU was the same. They lost a tank, a demining vehicle and several armored vehicles. Then the Ukrainian armed forces decided to abandon attacks with the use of equipment and switch to other tactics. What is the new tactic? They bring the infantry to the border in vehicles, then the infantry dismounts at the border. Demining vehicles clear the passages, remove the dragon's teeth and clear the area. After that, the infantry enters through the passages. They don't bring equipment into the Belgorod region anymore, as they have already lost a lot of it there. That's why they changed their tactics. You'll ask, where do they get so many soldiers and reserves if they were defeated in Kursk region? The answer is simple. They are already grabbing everyone. I'm sure you've seen many shots and videos of the 200s. But tell me, have you seen videos with 200 female Ukrainian armed forces soldiers? Women Ukrainian armed forces stormtroopers? How about that? I posted a video in the video channel yesterday, where an assault group of the AFU was defeated. Among the dead were women stormtroopers. So the Ukrainian armed forces have soldiers. If necessary, they are already employing women. Now for specifics. There are 3 areas that the Ukrainian armed forces are attacking. Demidovka. Here are the most persistent and fierce battles. The main emphasis of the Ukrainian armed forces has been on this very section for 2 days. Grafovka, the Ukrainian armed forces are a complete failure here. They are not getting anywhere. The area of the village of Prylia ***, Ukrainian attack aircrafts have settled in forests on the outskirts of the village about half a kilometer away from the village. Stormtroopers continue to be brought there, accumulating resources. Let me tell you right away. This is not Kursk 2.0, as many people write in the comments. I read the comments and understand where such an opinion comes from. But just look at the map and everything becomes clear. I will now clearly show on another map how it is different and why it cannot be compared at all. How long has it been since the attempts to break into the Belgorod region? 2 days. What have the AFU achieved so far? This small zone of control. They have not entered a single village, neither Demidovka, nor Grafovka, nor Prilsy. They are only hiding at the moment in the forest belts, where they are being covered by artillery and FABs. So although American and Ukrainian cartographers draw a zone of control here, it's hard to call it that. Well, if you are hiding in the forest, trying to survive under air and artillery attacks, and it is called your control, well, so be it. But this is the Ukrainian armed forces' zone of control in Belgorod region. It's only about 6 km superscript 2. And how after that many people say that this is definitely Kursk 2.0? Would you like to see a map of the Ukrainian armed forces invasion of Kursk region? Let's have a look. Let's switch to this map, leaf through August, the beginning of the 6th. We need 2 days later, that is the 8th of August. This blue dotted line is the line of contact in Kursk region 2 days after the AFU invasion. By that time they already controlled more than 200 km superscript 2. How does that compare? 6 km superscript 2 after 2 days and more than 200 square kilometers after 2 days are the same thing? Of course not. Now that we have that point cleared up, let's talk about the prospects of the AFU offensive in Belgorod region and what they are trying to accomplish. What is their ultimate goal? The goal, as I said, is the urban-type settlement Kursk-style Yaruga. From there they will try to get to the highway that leads to Belgorod. How realistic is that? It seems to me that the Ukrainian armed forces have zero chances here. There is no collapse of the front, as it was in the Kursk region. The Ukrainian armed forces are in deft defense, losing a lot of equipment and personnel. Yes, of course, they can safely throw even women into the battle. Everything is clear with this. Now, having lost a large amount of valuable equipment, the Ukrainian armed forces have changed their tactics. Now they act only in infantry groups. But you can't go far on foot, and you can't make big breakthroughs. Why did they manage to capture such a large territory in Kursk Oblast in a short period of time? Because then, in early August 2024, the defenses fell apart. The Ukrainian armed forces attacked with equipment and just drove forward without resistance. That's why they were able to create such a huge bridgehead. It's different here. Machinery does not pass. They burn it on the approach to the defense line. And this line is exactly the same defense line with dragon's teeth and minefields. Only infantry groups are trying to break through. But like I said, you can't get far that way. Right now they are entrenched in the forest belts in front of Demidovka and in front of Prilsy. I think that today they will make an assault, try to get a grip on the outskirts of these villages. And then again and again they will throw stormtroopers into the battle to advance further. But the Russian army is ready. The first days of the offensive showed that. And although the Ukrainian armed forces managed to break through into the Belgorod region, they did it with great difficulty. They control only 5-6 km superscript 2, which, cynical as it may sound, is nothing more than a statistical error for the front. Now for the other sections of the front. Kursk and Sumy regions, no significant changes here. There is simply nothing new to tell you, because there is nothing to tell. Kharkiv region, Russian troops are making progress here. A few days ago they forced the Oskol River in this area. And yesterday they took control of the village of Krasny Pervy. This is a significant success, because in this way they are encircling the village of Kamenka, which is the only obstacle to the complete connection of the attacking groups into a single bridgehead. And by the way, just for reference, the Russian bridgehead on the right bank of the Oskol River is already more than the entire Kursk bridgehead of the Ukrainian armed forces. Or rather, what is left of the Kursk bridgehead. And this bridgehead on the right bank of the Oskol continues to grow, while the Ukrainian armed forces bridgehead in the Kursk region continues to shrink. Let's continue to analyze the situation and discuss possible scenarios of further development of events. What are the prospects for the Ukrainian armed forces in Belgorod region? Now the AFU are trying to gain a foothold on the very 5 to 6 square kilometers in Belgorod region, but as I have already said, it is negligible for a full-fledged bridgehead. Because you can't go far without equipment. And equipment is destroyed on the approaches. This has already been proven by the first days of the offensive. Nevertheless, the Ukrainian armed forces are likely to continue their attempts to gain a foothold and expand their zone of control. What can they count on? An attempt to build up forces at the expense of manpower. The Ukrainian armed forces are already using assault groups without equipment. The infantry is sneaking through forest belts, using natural shelters. This shows that the emphasis is on close combat and maximum use of manpower. But it's also a weakness. Without the support of armored vehicles and artillery, such groups become easy targets for Russian drones, artillery, and aircraft. Already, Russian forces are covering these groups with FABs and heavy artillery. The AFU's infantry losses will only increase. Attempted strike on Kursk-style Yaruga. Kursk-style Yaruga remains a key target for the AFU, as it opens a direct route to Belgorod. But the problem is that the AFU needs to first overcome the defensive lines, which are saturated with dragon's teeth, minefields and firing positions of the Russian army. Now they can't even get close to the outskirts of Krasnaya Yaruga because artillery keeps them under constant fire. So there is little chance of a successful assault, to put it mildly. Pressure through forest belts and bypass maneuvers. The Ukrainian armed forces can try to use forest belts and small villages for stealthy maneuvers to flank the Russian group. But even here there is a problem. Russian reconnaissance is active, and drones and fire correction will not give chances to stealthily lead a large group through the defense line. All this suggests that the Ukrainian armed forces are acting more on a whim, hoping for some kind of miracle, than on a well-thought-out strategy. How will the Russian army act? Judging by the way events are unfolding, the Russian army is already preparing a counterstrike. But because the AFU have effectively cornered themselves. Destruction of infantry groups. While the AFU are trying to gain a foothold in the forest belts, Russian artillery and aviation are methodically destroying these groups. This is already having an effect. The Ukrainian armed forces are suffering serious losses. Surrounding and cutting off supply routes. If the Russian army is able to take control of the villages and roads adjacent to the front line, the Ukrainian armed forces will be trapped. Without supplies and support, the infantry will not last long. Building up the pace of the offensive in Kharkiv Oblast. The successes in the Oskol area show that the Russian army is capable of larger offensives. If the AFU loses control of Kharkiv Oblast, it will automatically jeopardize their entire front in Belgorod Oblast. What's next? Most likely, the AFU will try to hold at least symbolic control over part of Belgorod region to show success to the west. But in practice it looks like an attempt to hold water in a sieve. The Russian army, in turn, will continue to methodically destroy these groups, using aviation, artillery, and reconnaissance. It is important to understand that the Ukrainian armed forces in this situation actually found themselves in the position of defensive, although initially it was an offensive operation. If the Russian army continues to hold the initiative, we may see an attempt at a larger counterattack by Russia in the coming days. Where will all this lead to? The Ukrainian armed forces are unlikely to be able to keep control over the area in Belgorod region. The losses in equipment and personnel are too high. Attempts to gain a foothold on the outskirts of Demidovka and Prylesia will continue, but without equipment they will be unable to advance further. The Russian army has already shown that it can effectively hold its defenses and launch counterattacks. The success in Kharkiv Oblast confirms this. In general, the situation is developing dynamically. The Ukrainian armed forces have lost a huge amount of equipment, switched to infantry, and actually put themselves in a weak position. We will watch the development of events. Stay tuned, it will only get more interesting. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the latest news and analysis of the situation on the front.